Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. My reading week this week has been pretty good. I started my reading week continuing my reread of Fullmetal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa. Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the most popular manga series in the world. It is about the Ulrich brothers, Edward and Alphonse. The brothers are prodigy alchemists who one day attempt human transmutation in an attempt to bring back their deceased mother from the dead. The transmutation fails, and on the rebound, Edward loses his leg and Alphonse loses his body. To save Alphonse's life, Edward sacrifices an arm to transcribe Alphonse's soul onto a suit of armor. A year later, after being outfitted with automill prosthetics, Edward becomes a state alchemist, using the position in an attempt to find the Philosopher's Stone, an alchemical artifact reputed to be able to bypass the law of equivalent exchange and be able to pay the toll so that the brothers can restore their original bodies. As the brothers travel, they discover the horrible secret behind the Philosopher's Stone and uncover an ancient conspiracy going to the very foundations of their country. A conspiracy that sees both brothers and a number of their allies as important ingredients in important human sacrifices for a forthcoming promised day. And the brothers have to decide how to restore their bodies while also combating this conspiracy with their allies, some of whom were former enemies. So, I really enjoyed this reread. And it was definitely much needed last week and this week. So one thing I noticed about my reading this time, and this is my fourth reread, I first read the series shortly after it finished back in 2010. And then I read it again shortly after I collected the entire series a few years ago when I got back into manga. Then last year I reread the whole series in February, and then this year I reread the whole series in March. So this is my fourth reread of the entire series. So one thing I noticed on this reread was how this first volume is more episodic than what the series ultimately becomes. The series itself is ultimately about the brothers trying to figure out a way to restore themselves while also defeating this conspiracy. And that's what this story is about, with their conflict with Scar sort of being a recurring tangential storyline until Scar joins the brothers in their attempt to fight this conspiracy and to change a mistress from an authoritarian military dictatorship to something that's a lot more benevolent. And another thing I noticed was the just how strong the 15th volume is. So volume 15 steps away from the main action of the story to explore what happened in Ishbal. So in this series' backstory, so basically what the country of Amestris is It's a small country that was taken over by the big bad, or founded by the big bad of the series. And he has a specific goal in mind for what Amestris is meant to do for him. And so gradually the country has expanded in a nearly perfect circle. And at certain points in the country and on the borders, mass casualty events, whether military conflict or insurrection or invasion or what have you, occurs. And one of these points of conflict is in Ishbal, which I'm not entirely sure whether they were an independent country that was then conquered by Amestris or was a relatively friendly nation bordering Amestris that was then annexed. But there was a long-running conflict in Ishbal that ultimately ended with a genocide where most of the Ishbalans were killed by the state military. And so the 15th volume looks at that conflict. And a lot of the themes of the series that I kind of started to pick up a lot more on this reread was how, on the one hand, you have the characters who perpetrated that genocide deal with it, how they process it, and also how the victims of the genocide have processed it and move on, and how ultimately both the more heroic, well, I guess you could say the more heroic, or Edward's allies in the military, wanting to make a better Amestris, and how Scar forgoes vengeance in a desire to attempt to force a reckoning and a new Amestris that will recognize what it did. And it's really interesting. So that was one thing that I was really noticing on this reread. Was dealing with that. And also how exactly the brothers try to correct their own mistake, particularly once they realize that there are very few options that would allow them to get their bodies back without using someone else. So it was a very fascinating and enjoyable reread. So after I finished Fullmetal Alchemist, I reread Before Our Eyes, New Selected Poems 1975 to 2017 by Eleanor Wilner. So this, so I read this collection over Monday and Tuesday and quite enjoyed it. The interesting thing, well, I don't know exactly how interesting it is, but in this new and selected collection, it's backwards chronological. So the collection opens with new poems and then works its way backward to Wilner's earliest collection at the very end. And I enjoyed this reread. It was quite a bit of fun. Then on Wednesday, I read Amerigun by Anne-Marie Macari. This is her newest collection of poetry. It came out about 2 weeks ago, and it is incredibly powerful and moving. Much of the poems in this collection deal with processing the death of Macari's brother, who died 40 years ago due to gun violence, and a lot of the other poems in this collection also deal with the more contemporary issue of gun violence in America. Other poems deal with processing grief and confronting and dealing with grief as parents die, as loved ones die. It was a very powerful and moving collection. I also really enjoyed the Book of the Rotten Daughter by Alice Friman. This is an older collection of hers and deals with aging parents, of not feeling that you're as attentive to those aging parents, the experience of seeing your parents in nursing homes and how that works out, of them aging, as well as other poems. And I really enjoyed this collection as well. So, that's what I read this past reading week. Today I'm going to start on The Decay of the Angel by Yukio Mishima, translated from the Japanese by Edward G. Seidensticker. And then once I finish The Decay of the Angel off, I will be reading some more poetry. I think what I might do for April is on Friday and the weekend, I will focus on novels, and then over the course of the work week, I will read slim volumes of poetry and volumes of manga, because I'm expecting I should be getting the March new releases, my March manga haul, in sometime next week or the following week, depending when Book People mails that order to me. So far, I have not received an email from them, so I don't know what its status is. So I will report back when those volumes come in. So, yeah, that's the plan for next week. So, you can't really tell from this angle with the light and everything, but so yesterday I put together 2 new bookcases, and they are currently behind me. So even though I am currently in the process of uploading the final part of the history section of my library tour, that version of my history section is gone. Yesterday, after I put the bookcases together, I cleared all of the books off of that bookcase that was behind me and started to rearrange my history collection, and I'm quite happy with how things turned out. So yeah, anyway, BookTube, I'm going to go ahead and find out what that noise was, and I will see you next Sunday with the first part of the fiction, poetry, and drama section of my library tour, when I start on the anthologies. And then it will be 3 weeks of fiction, poetry, and drama, arranged alphabetically. So look forward to that, and I will see you then. So have a great rest of your Friday, and have a great weekend.